them out because it's so loud here. Okay, so Nicole, this is Dylan, so I'm here to answer or ask questions, maybe answer. Nicole's really the host on this whole thing. So there she is, rolling a bike in, and she's just going to take some photos of our new bikes that we've got in, or new bikes that need photos, and talk to you about what it's like, how to do it yourself.
I totally forgot that I have a microphone on, so I could have been
Were
talking.
You like grunting and stuff?
Probably. Sorry. So I'm going to show you kind of two of the things that I do most when I'm doing photography for Throttle Company, the selling a bike side and the artistic side. So depending on which thing you're looking for, or if you're just here to listen to me talk, you're weird, but whichever one helps you the most. So the first one I'm going to do is more of a like professional, accurate representation of a bike. This is a 2023 Moto V7 Special. So it's the new color, and you might think this bike is black, but it has a little bit of blue in it, and that's important for just your curiosity's sake, but also accurately representing that color for someone who's trying to buy it. So one of my big pet peeves with motorcycle photography is that it doesn't ever look the same way when you get it as when it looks like in person. This is a beautiful bike, and I had no idea it had a slight blue tinge to it. So my goal in photographing this bike is going to be to make sure that you know when you're looking at a photo what this bike looks like. So I'm going to grab my camera and then we're going to get started. So Dylan is going to kind of show you some of the features of the bike that I would be focusing on. Obviously, you want to get, if you're trying to sell a bike, or while I'm trying to sell a bike to you, I'm trying to get both sides, front and back, the dash, a lot of the like basic parts of the bike, but I also want it to look cool. So I focus in on some of the features like the engine or the dash or the seat if it has cool stitching on it. All of those things are really important to show off what the bike looks like. So I'm going to not talk for a couple of seconds while I'm shooting, and Dylan will probably have a hard time keeping up with me because I go around pretty fast. So
oh no,
sorry. So if you can still hear me, it's also important to get down low so that you can get good perspective on the bike. That's partially an artistic thing, but I also like to do that from a like good representation. It probably doesn't matter to you if you're selling a bike to make sure that you don't have an opposing brand logo in the background, but I do try to avoid that, particularly if you are trying to represent it accurately. I like to get the detail anywhere the bike says the name of the brand. I want to focus on that. I want to focus on anything that shows a silhouette, so like the exhaust or the way the wheels or tires are. And you'll notice that we're in the shade instead of out in the sun. I think a very common misconception, people think they want a bright sunny day. I actually hate when it's super bright and sunny. You want to have diffused light. So Dylan, if you could like look that way with the camera, you can see it's bright and sunny out on those bikes. And the shadow is not pretty. So unless you're going for an artistic shadow, we don't want that. So what I look for is a shaded area where the light comes through a big opening, whether that's a window or like a big overhang like we have here. That's why I love the gantry. It's a perfect diffusement of light. But then I'll show you that I also will move it into stark shadow on purpose for more of the artistic side. But if you're selling a bike and you want to represent it accurately, it should be in some pretty flat light. A really cloudy day is actually a perfect day to do it. I would really love if it was super cloudy today while we're doing this, but beggars can't be choosy, and you make it work. That's why you'll notice that a lot of our photographs look the same, as I try to photograph them on days that are similar in lighting. So I'm going to show you the back of the camera. This is focusing on the color, the engine, the exhaust, and this light is perfectly good at showing the bike. It doesn't need to be super bright. We're under the shadow, like I said. So I'm going to get a couple more of the front, back, and sides. Like I said, you should always have. So what I do when I'm taking photographs of bikes is I am zoomed out to see the whole thing, and then I zoom in the same position that I'm sitting in or standing in to get the other focus points, I guess is the best way to put it. But that's how you can get variety without moving very much, particularly if you're constricted with space. So if you're taking a photo of your bike in the garage, and we see this a lot in like Craigslist ads, where it's just a blur, or it's just really close in on just one part of the bike, I would not buy a bike that I can't see all four sides of. So I wouldn't expect somebody else to want to buy a bike that they can't see all the parts of, particularly if they're buying it from like online or something like that. The other thing, we won't have this with this bike because it is perfect, but if you're selling a bike that has imperfections, you want to point those out. There's no reason why you shouldn't be disclosing that, and there's no reason why you shouldn't be not highlighting it, but at least showing it. So now that I've gotten the all four sides in a what I consider a kind of boring way, now I'm going to start taking like detail shots that look really cool. So right now, Dylan, if you can come over my shoulder, you can see that one of the unique features of a Moto Guzzi is the engine and how it sticks out. I think that it's beautiful that way. So I like to focus on how the engine comes out, how it interacts with the tank, and the difference between the matte on the cam covers and the gloss of the tank on this particular motorcycle. The paint job is beautiful, and I just think that looks really cool. So now you can get into more of like an artistic view. If you're looking to do motorcycle photography for yourself, I always have like one thing that's my thing that some people have noticed, but I like to get my feet in a shot because I don't like to take pictures of my face, but I want to be in the photo. So I like to have my feet in the shot. And then my boots are recognizable. So this is what, well, you can see my feet. It decided to turn it, but motorcycle and my feet. And I use those for myself, not for Throttle Company.
I guess the thing that I want to ask is, you know, you're using a fancy camera, and like a lot of people do have fancy cameras, but what about if you're just using your phone, and which I know you take lots of photos on the phone of bikes? What would you do differently? Anything?
It depends on what phone you have. I'm not familiar with anything other than iPhone when it comes to a smartphone, but you can take perfectly acceptable motorcycle photos, portraits even, with your phone. There are things that my camera can do that a phone can't do, but from a perspective of putting your bike up for sale and you want decent photos of it, you don't need to have a fancy camera. And even for artistic photos, I have plenty of Andy Plant, plenty of motorcycle friends that I envy the photos they take on their phone. So if you just, I mean, you don't pay for each shot you take, so there's no reason to not take 50 of the same thing until you get something that looks right. It's less about your equipment and more about the motorcycle positioning, the lighting, angles. There are some times, like for this, if you will come over here and over my shoulder again, for this direction, I love this shot, particularly with Moto Guzzis. I don't do it as much with the Royal Enfields because the engine doesn't stick out as much, but shooting from up high down on the tank and the eagle emblem over the engine is a artistic shot that if you have your phone in portrait mode would handle just perfectly. There's not a whole lot that a decent iPhone can't take. Obviously, I can tell the difference between my camera photos and the photos I take on my phone, but for most people, that's totally acceptable. Was that a question in the chat?
No, but people now, Aaron's saying he has a GoPro and a Pixel phone.
I don't know anything, Aaron, about Pixel.
But it's got to be the same idea. You had mentioned angles. We haven't moved the bike, but do you normally do anything differently like that?
I haven't moved the bike because a lot of it has to do with whether I am kneeling down, whether I'm looking up at the bike. Like I can do an entire photo shoot and never move this bike and be happy with the photos that I get. So like one of the photos I just took is that the front of the engine case has this eagle on it. And so that's a detail I would want to show. And if you know anything about photography or if you put your phone in portrait mode, you can do this. where you just focus on something and it kind of blurs out the rest of it. That makes it something that's interesting. So if you're trying to make something artistic, just looking at isolating parts of the motorcycle is my favorite way to do that. And you'll notice a lot of our photographs on our Instagram are like that, where I'm focusing on details and then maybe editing it in a way that makes it look interesting. But if you're selling a motorcycle, you shouldn't edit the photos for color or for blemishes or anything like that. It should be just how it comes out of your phone, because in my opinion, that would be misrepresenting. Like, this bike looks black until I put it in the sun, and we're about to do that. It has blue in it. So I do want to represent that, but I don't want to put a filter on it that makes it look green, unless that's kind of on purpose, which I have done. Sometimes you're sparking conversation, but for the purposes of selling a motorcycle, represent it how it looks, not artistically.
You basically just answered this as he was asking, but Dave was asking about what's the line between artistic and misleading, and I feel like you at least covered most of that.
Accurate representation. So like if I wanted to sell a motorcycle that I also took artistic photographs of, at least also show the unedited. I think there's nothing wrong, because I've had people who have come here who have said, I came to your shop because I saw this really cool photo and then looked up the listing for the bike. Because our Instagram is a little bit more artistic than like Cycle Trader, where we list bikes. So I definitely do edit photos of bikes we have for sale for artistic measure, but I always make sure there's at least a corresponding unedited shot of that same thing, particularly if it's a blemish, because I want to accurately represent the motorcycle. But when it comes to like editing, especially when I take them out to like murals and stuff, the whole point of that photo is to be artistic. But if that gets somebody to look at the listing for that bike, I want them to see the bike as it actually is as well. So does that answer that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is probably not something most people are going to do, but like I said, with my boot photo, I always have like what I hope looks iconic, but a photo that I do with almost all of them, which is a really, really low, and this camera helps with that because I can put my screen up, but a really, really low, sorry for my sniffle, photo that I just think makes it look badass. And the other thing I didn't mention is shooting in the orientation that you're going to use the photo is better than cropping it. So like, I'll show you the back of my camera on this. This would be something I would put on Instagram stories. This is something that I would put as a post or on our Facebook or on the listing, is whether it's portrait or horizontal landscape. So it just depends on what you're going to use it for. And like I said, you're not paying for every shutter or button you push. So take both. Don't. One of our like big things about taking photographs with bikes is that I think a lot of people think they're kind of too cool to take photos of themselves in front of a bridge while they're riding their bike. Take the photo, even if you never show anyone. But the number of times I've had someone ask me after they've gone on a ride with us, hey, did you take any photos? Yes, I did. Would you like them? Yeah. So don't feel embarrassed to take a photo of you with your bike or with your friends with your bike, because you're going to want it later. And if I'm not with you, or your photographer friend isn't with you, then you won't have it. So don't feel like you look stupid or something. Just take the photo. So I'm going to move this bike and get the other shot that I normally get when the light is like this specifically. So if you're shooting at the same time, well, now that the season has changed, it's a little bit different now, but the same general time of day, I get this cool shadow thing twice a day if the sun is really bright. And I'll have to see if I've got it in a good spot or not. Kind of missed it entirely. So bear with me while I move this around. I'm trying to put it somewhat in the light and somewhat in the shade, where it'll show the blue like tint. There, that's a little bit better. Okay, so yeah, as you zoom with the feet, you can see the specular highlight from the sun, and then you can see that the bike has a little bit of a gray-blue tint in it. So I want to make sure that I have represented that. So the other bike that we have this with a lot is the the green classic has this sparkle that you literally, when you roll it out into the sun, you can see it, and it looks so cool. So this is more of the artistic shot, and I will definitely edit this because it'll just look better edited. But now that I'm not representing the bike super accurately, I do get a little bit finicky about things that stick out. Like we put these dongles on the bikes for charging, and I don't necessarily want that in the shot as much. So I'm gonna have to try to keep the Royal Enfield logo out of this bike shot. And these aren't gonna look as good on the back of the camera. You'll need to come in the shade to see the back of my screen, but when I edit them, it'll make sense, because I know you guys have seen something like this that I've shot that has this double shadow line from the gantry. So it's a little bit hard to see, but it will look good edited. Like, I will definitely edit out the cracks in the asphalt. I don't worry about that on the photos that are sold. But if I want this big open space at the bottom for artistic reasons, then I'll do that. How are we doing on time?
It's been 16 minutes.
Do we have questions? Or am I just still going?
Not really. People were talking about their different cameras and stuff, but I think you should keep going.
Okay.
Are there different, the next bike is not shiny, it's matte. Is there something you do differently for that?
It depends on the shadow. Like, I will use the Royal Enfield sign on this one, so this matte black Meteor will be in the sun a lot more than the other one would, because I'm trying to avoid the Royal Enfield sign, which, if you can look over at the Moto Guzzi sign and show that we painted that garage door so that I could shoot in front of it. But right now, this would be horrible to take a photo in front of unless I was going for really, really hardscape look. But having something that's a super interesting backdrop is also a good, from the artistic side, a good way to draw attention. If you're a motorcycle, for example, this black motorcycle would look really good in front of a multicolored mural. It would stand out. So that's something to think about if you're going for the artistic photo, is not even just what does the bike look like, but where are you taking photos of it.
Aaron maybe was joking, but he asked if you could do in-person directions for specific bikes, which is funny because his bike's in the garage right now. We could go wheel it out.
He wants in-person direction for how to take photos of his bike.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, sure. What I'm hearing is, Aaron, you just want to hang out, sir.
This that one could use wipe down, but I don't have anything.
Okay, so that's an interesting thing to point out, is that when it comes to how meticulous I am about this kind of thing, dust, unless it's in like the light that bike is in right now, really doesn't show up all that well. So I can unfortunately represent a dirty bike as if it were clean, unless it's like spattered with dirt and mud. So you don't have to worry about your bike being super clean unless you're in the sun. So you can kind of tell that back here, this fender is probably just as dusty and you can't really see it. But then up here on the tank, you can see it. Particularly on a matte bike, you can notice the difference between dirty and clean. But this particular bike does not need to have a whole bunch of whole body shots, because I'm really just focusing on the fact that this one doesn't have tripper on it. So one of the things that we do is we make sure, even if we have a photo from Royal Enfield or Moto Guzzi, that I have also taken a photo of it, that this is a physical bike we have in our possession. So that's a little bit different than if you're worried about selling your own bike. Obviously you have it. But when you see photos of our bikes, that's a bike I have physically put my hands on. So this bike needs to be photographed because it doesn't have tripper, which the previous photos I've taken of a matte black Meteor had tripper. So I don't need to do a whole lot of whole body stuff for this one.
Okay, so another one was, do you have a favorite season to shoot in because of the lighting? Winter, that kind of thing?
Winter can be hard.
Because the sun is harsh?
The sun is harsher when it is out, and it's for a much smaller window, plus it's usually cold. But if you live in Ohio, you know that Christmas Day could be 60 degrees, but you also don't have as good backdrops. So, in the winter, I tend to shoot more against hardscape, which is like brick buildings, versus like nature, which will be trees with no leaves on them. So unless you find evergreen trees, which are probably going to show up more like winter anyway, winter's not my favorite. I don't particularly care for spring either. If I'm to pick my favorite, it's probably late summer, early fall, like when the leaves are just starting to change, because then you have pretty colors in the leaves and it's not as hot, so I can go longer than if it's like July. But you know, having the sun rising at 7 in the morning and setting at 9:30 in the evening. Sorry if that's loud. You just don't want to shoot if you're shooting in the summer. You don't want to shoot between like 10 a.m. and 2. That's when the sun is the harshest, unless you're going for harsh shadows, or you go downtown and you go in the shade of a building, which could be really cool. We have a lot of urban scape photography because of that. Sometimes I go to a location that I've scouted at the wrong time of day, and then I go back there and the light is terrible and I have to find something else. So make sure you have a backup plan when it comes to what you're going for, or just go with it. Honestly, I usually just go with it. If you are shooting in the summer and the sun is really high in the sky and you shoot in a shadow, your photos are going to look a little blue. So if that matters to you, shoot out in the sun. So if you have more questions about that, I can help you later. That's a little bit more technical, but like if you're in the shadow, they're going to look more cooler. So even if it's summer, it's going to be not as warm looking as if it's out in the sun with diffused light, like when it's cloudy. Does that answer that?
I think so.
The best time of day, honestly, at any time, you have to look it up for every season, but the hour before and the half hour after the sun sets, the light is the best. It's interesting. Usually it's diffused depending on if it's like a straight up sunset, but it's called golden hour, and then the half hour after is blue hour. So like that hour and a half is the best for like artsy, portraiture type stuff.
So someone had mentioned Clint, who is our friend, some Ohio guy, and they said maybe it'd be kind of cool to bring him in. I think that would be interesting to get a different person's perspective, because obviously people have different, whatever it is, different methods. Clint is also, your style is to try to make this bike look interesting with sort of the end goal as at least, maybe it's selling this individual bike, but it's like selling the concept of the whole thing that we do. Clint is mostly editorial kind of lifestyle-y.
Yeah, so Clint has a very identifiable style, which I do sometimes. My style for throttle photography is very different than my style for my own personal artistic style, particularly with motorcycles, but more so with portraiture, which Clint, in my opinion, and this is a very positive opinion of him, but his motorcycle photography is in a portraiture style. It's more in an artistic style, more in a, like he uses HDR a lot, which is good for objects. In my opinion, not so great for people. So if you're taking photos of yourself in a photo with your motorcycle, HDR is probably not, your phone can probably do HDR, or it's a filter that you can do in your phone. It just makes people look a little rough. So if you're looking at taking a photo of yourself, just don't edit it that way. But it does make motorcycles look really cool. It can up the chrome look, and then I don't know, it's an editing style.
How about Aaron specifically asked, besides the lighting, what is the biggest challenge taking photos of a motorcycle or other model?
The biggest challenge, besides lighting, is going to be angles. And if you're talking about shooting a person, it's going to be having that person be comfortable enough, confident enough. It's one of the reasons why we don't have a lot of photographs with motorcycles with people, because it's hard to find someone who's comfortable enough to pose on a motorcycle or with one. So what I like to do is, if I've taken a good photo of them, I like to show them the back of the camera right away. Sorry if that's loud. I like to show them the back of my camera right away to get them comfortable. If you want to take a photo of your... I'll wait. This is live, so you're going to get me pantomiming this. That guy was in his SUV going, like his car was going fast. Okay. What were we talking about? Aaron's question about.
Well, I want to specifically. I feel like this is one of those things where you just get it on the angles. So let's talk about the angles more. How are we going to translate this to just your average person? Say they're just using their phone, and I feel like the lighting and the angles are probably the two most important things.
Okay,
so tell me
I feel
how
like a lot
you decide,
of people,
or maybe are there? I know so it's a racetrack all of a sudden. How do you decide? Like, are there like 4 angles you definitely get? Like, you definitely get both sides of the bike. You definitely get the
so
back
to me
and the
that's
front.
not angles.
Yeah,
because that is something different. So I get, if you want to think about it as a scene, to me this is one scene, this side of the bike, and this is in 4 segments. So straight on is the whole scene, and then I might break this up to, I need to see this 3/4, and then we have crates from the last time the Royal Enfields were delivered, and a car, which isn't usually parked there, but I want to kind of use the bike to block that. So I'm going to kind of lean down a little bit this way. It's going to change my angle a little, and that car is going to be in the background, but there's not anything I can do about that. So I have the back 3/4, and then I'm going to move this way because this angle shows a little bit differently than that angle shows. That one shows the tail light, the back of the seat, the fender, the turn signals, and some of the exhaust, more towards the exit of the exhaust. This side shows the side panel, the seat, the side of the tank, the side of the engine, the back of the front wheel and fender, the way the handlebars are turned shows a certain thing. So I'm going to take a photo of that. I think a lot of people also want to take it from their height, which is fine, except that's not very interesting. So I usually try, if I'm farther away, I'm more likely to get lower down for the angle, and that makes it look interesting. And then I crop as best I can anything that's in the scene that I don't want to see. Or I zoom in and focus on, like, I can't really crop out my car as where I put the bike. So I'm just going to zoom in a little bit to the middle of the engine and the side panel, but I don't want to cut off the mirror at the top, because that's like cutting someone's head off.
Oh yeah, that's something you always get on me about, is not cutting off parts of it. Like, you do it with people.
Yeah, so
but you don't
think
want to
about
cut
it-
off their arm because it looks like they don't have the end of their hand or
Yes,
whatever.
so it's not that you can't crop in and cut something off and it look right. It's what is that thing. So like I can cut kind of where the light, you can see the light from the sun and the shadow. I could cut that bike in half and it'll look good. If I have open space on the wall over here, it'll look good. But if I cut off the front, I can show you. Okay, so if I have this, if you can see that.
I cannot. Let's go over here.
Okay. Okay. Okay, yeah, that's the point I'm trying to make. That entire front wheel, you can see all of it, and you know there's a bike back there, but you aren't like weird about it. So I'm going to show you what would look weird and what you shouldn't do. Is over here, I've cut off the front of this wheel, I've cut off a mirror, and that just looks unintentional. So that's what I mean by don't cut things off. So think about it like a person. You don't want to cut somebody off at the elbow, the neck, depending on what you're doing, their waist, or like cut their ankles off. But if you cut them off in the middle of an appendage, then it's okay. So if I cut somebody off here, or at their thigh, or at their calf, or halfway down their arm, you've kind of seen the joint that implies there's the rest of the arm, or the part of their body that implies the rest of it's there. So think about it that way.
To me, as a lay person, let me scoot past here. As a lay person, that photo that you showed me of what not to do makes me anxious.
Yes, that's the
I
whole
just
point.
think I want to see more of it. You could always, especially now on your phone and stuff, you can zoom in, so showing the whole thing. So
that's the exact reason why you don't want to do it. When you're taking a picture of a person, it makes you feel a visceral reaction of kind of like, ugh, there's something wrong with that person. It does the same thing with a motorcycle, but if you're trying to sell a motorcycle, what it could make them feel is, there's something wrong with this bike. Why am I not seeing the whole wheel? What are they hiding? So that's the way I think about it. I might be personifying it a little bit too much, but It's a weird artistic pet peeve of mine.
Okay, I
I'll
have
watch
something that actually Andy, who you mentioned earlier. Hi, Andy. Nicole said she's jealous of your cell phone photos that you get when you're out riding. But he mentioned that we should maybe think about setting up he called it a station, but like a photo section, which we actually have done. That was really early on in our bike nights. We had our friend Zach, who's a photographer. And if you've been in the office and you've seen the photo or the Bob's Burgers drawing of Nicole and I, that is based on a photo that we got from that. So we had a whole white tent background and like lights and everything because it was at nighttime. And then anyone who showed up, you just wheel your bike over and stand next to it if you want or whatever. And we just sent out those photos afterwards. So that's a good idea. We have done it in the past, and we just haven't done it recently. But that's not a bad idea to add something to add. Because the funny thing is, and you touched on it, but so many people act in the moment in front of people. They act embarrassed. They're too cool to stand next to their bike. But later on, that's the same person that's sharing it and so proud of it. They make it their profile picture,
Yeah.
So people do, you're proud of your bike, or you're just like, this is a thing you're into. Why not get a photo of it? And so I totally agree with that.
So
let me look through the chat, but you can go ahead.
So something that's interesting that I like to do, this is more of the artistic side, is in the harsh light like this, if I want to make the tire look cool, I can do that by also including its shadow. So I took a photo that you probably will have to go into the shade with me, because even this camera. So I also can show, if you can see that.
Yeah.
Okay. That there are other bikes in the background, and then the shadow there. So you can make the sun, I would edit this and then crop it in as a square. And to me, that looks like a geometric, like interesting, artsy type of thing, while also being able to show that it has bi-brake brakes and disc brakes and all that kind of thing, that it's not really super fun and interesting to take a photo of a tire. Now, Ken just arrived on his motorcycle, and this is actually kind of a good example of when we have kickstands and coffee on Saturday, which is next Saturday. And people park generally right here in the first part of the day, which would be well, this is the end of kickstands and coffee time for next week. But let me think about angle is to put your camera really low to the ground and shoot up a little. That makes it artistically interesting, but I'm just going to make a silhouette. And this is a portrait thing, but like this telephone pole is coming right out of the top of the forks. And you don't want something to come out of the top of someone's head. That's the bike's head, in my opinion. So you don't want to have something look like it's growing out of it. So I'm just going to move a little bit so that it's not right there. And then I'm going to get a really low angle. And it's going to be silhouetted, which if you're trying to sell a bike is not something you want. But at the very least, it's an artistic shot. You could also overexpose it so that the subject, and I think you can do this on most cameras. Sorry. Gina helped me fix this, but I'm not very technologically inclined, which is kind of ironic for me. But my nose changed the focus on my camera. I couldn't figure out why. So at the very least, you get a shot that you could edit and it looked okay. Well, that was it. So it's really bright in the background, but the bike is properly exposed.
Okay, well, I think that's good. I think we should wrap it up because I was worried about our connection issues.
Okay.
But I guess say bye and thanks for watching.
Let me know if you have any other questions. I love this stuff. So